Hello, everyone. My name is Pete Friedman. I'm the founder of CentralTrack.com, and I'm excited to be joined today by Jared Himstedt of Balcones Whisky down in Waco, a little ways down the road. How are you today, Jared?
I'm doing good. Thanks.
It's good to be joined by you today. I'm really excited to talk to you. Last week, I was able to uh, go on a tour of your facilities down in Waco, and I had a really great time just getting to see how you guys put together your product and learn a little bit about Balcones and its story, how it came to be, and how it got to be where it is today. So,
Mhm.
first and foremost, what's your title over at Balcones? You're the man over there.
I'm the head distiller. Yeah, we've got a moderately flat structure over here. So, being the man, there's a lot of people that, do their job really diligently and thoughtfully and carefully that allow us to do what we do. But, yeah, I always joke that it just means everything's my fault,
Sure.
which is how it should be. So,
How long have you been with Balcones? What's your story there?
yeah, from the beginning, I my journey into whiskey started with beer, home brewing. Was super active with that. We tried to open breweries a couple times, and in hindsight, I'm really glad. It would have been a little bit too early, I think, for Waco to to handle it. It probably wouldn't have lasted if we had gotten a brewery started when we wanted to. Now, of course, Waco has 5 or 6, and we make beer here at the distillery too. But being someone that's kind of hands-on and DIY, once I started kind of falling in love with whiskey, it made perfect sense for us to kind of dabble and with no business plan, just to understand the thing that you enjoy, to understand the thing you're working with, just like a million people who, very much into food and spend a lot of time, and they read and they try out ingredients and try to pick up pointers and, buy different utensils and pots and pans, because there's things you just can't do if you don't have the right tools.
Right.
So I don't remember a moment of not thinking that the next obvious step is that you make your own. We kind of outgrew the garage at some point, and real estate in Waco at the time, not nearly as cheap now as it was then, but it was pretty cheap back then. Next thing we know, we've got a building. Next thing we know, we're talking about, I guess we should go ahead and get our permit. Like, who knows where this could go. And a friend's wife's brother, he's up, we're hanging out, talking about whiskey on the front porch kind of thing. He's got some money and kind of goes, why not? So anyway, it definitely felt like at every step, things were just rolling. And it was about a year into it before I think we went, oh man, we probably ought to quit our other jobs, because this is eating up, 80 hours a week.
And that was a major step, not just for you personally, but I think for spirits in Texas in general. I know that you guys call yourselves the first post-prohibition whiskey in Texas. What has that journey been like, and just kind of blazing your own trail? Because you guys aren't following a blueprint here. You're kind of making it up.
Yeah.
In a way.
One of the things that's probably one of the most rewarding things about making whiskey in Texas, and also one of the most nerve-wracking, is that there was no tradition. The famous parts of the world that everybody knows whiskey comes from. We got Tennessee and Kentucky in the U.S. Obviously, a lot of New England used to be, Pennsylvania and Maryland used to be known for rye a long, long time ago, that nobody alive barely remembers if this isn't, what you do for work. Then of course we all know the UK. We all know Scotch and Irish whiskey. So one of the funnest things, not just for us, but really just for small producers all over the world, we're having whiskey coming out of Taiwan and India and New Zealand and Australia and Texas and Oregon and Washington and New Mexico. It's just the possibility of flavors and combinations to come to the shelf for the whiskey drinker, for the whiskey lover. It's one of the most diverse production periods for whiskey that in human history. But that also means you don't have a whole lot of landmarks to go by. So you talk to everybody you can from these established traditions, places that have 8th generation distillers and, distilleries that opened in 18 something or 17 something. And you just ask them, and then you try to figure out what that they've learned that's relevant to where you're at, and what about where we are is completely new and that nobody can really help you with,
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to make mistakes and experiment and try some things. And as long as the feedback loop is good and you're diligent and you're paying attention to what you're getting back from your experiments, it's not that complicated to see what's working, figure out what the thing was, make another adjustment, and just keep going. Which I feel like we're still in the middle of that process. I mean, even this is our 13th year, and it still feels like that's not a long time when you're talking about products that take 2, 3, 4 years
exactly.
before they're ready, we're still just scratch the surface.
And that's part of the exciting thing I think about Balcones is you guys are, I think it, correct me if you disagree, but you guys are pretty experimental, and just in terms of the breadth of product that you put out. I mean, how many different labels are there associated with Balcones at any given time?
I mean, I think the last 3 years we've done at least like 20, I think, or so, 20, 21 different releases. And yeah, maybe part of that's coming over from a little bit of the culture around craft beer and bringing that to coming into whiskey with that mindset of like, no, there's always stuff. There needs to always be new stuff coming out, which I think in a more traditional whiskey model, you have 1 or 2 things, and then they're always available, and there might be a 3rd or 4th that come around the holidays or something, and that's it. But also part of it was knowing that we don't understand making whiskey in Texas yet. And if you stop with the first thing you do that kind of works, the easiest thing to do would be stop there. Right. And like, this works. We figured it out. This is tasty. It works with the environment well. People like it. They're buying it. We're done. Yeah. But we just still have way too many questions about what it means to interact with this climate, this microflora, grains and ingredients from here. There's just way too much that we're still excited to find out about. So we just kind of can't stop.
Yeah, and that's a really exciting thing. I mean, I think on most of your products, it says it right here, the original Texas whiskey. And I think what part of that's a really exciting part of the Balcones story is you guys use Texas product throughout this. It's not just made here, right? I mean, there's Texas corn and everything.
Yeah, we still do use a decent amount of Scottish barley, and that's kind of a side story. What does lead into talking about Lineage, but there's a little bit of paying homage to the whiskeys that we kind of fell in love with early in our whiskey journey, and kind of not reviving because they weren't completely dead, but there are some grain choices that were very popular that have kind of been left by the wayside for more efficient, kind of hybridized modern barley varieties. And so at our scale, it made sense to go back to some things that were delicious that deserved to be preserved, and ironically weren't being preserved even in their own tradition, and kind of bring them back, and kind of shine a light and kind of focus on them a little bit. So
I know, how important is it to keep that kind of Texas ingredient aspect? I mean, that's such a big part of the story for Balcones.
Well, that's brand new too. I mean, obviously corn and wheat have always done fine in Texas. There's a lot of rye, but as we found out, a lot of the rye that's being grown isn't being harvested. A lot of it's cover crop. So the rye we use for our rye is Elbin. It's everywhere. It's been used all over Texas for quite a long time. But when we started calling farmers and asking if we could buy it from them, they were kind of like, no, we plant it when we have fields that are laying fallow, and then we plow it under. You want to buy it? Like, sure, that's like free money. I plant it all the time, and nobody ever pays me for it. But once again,
for Texas farmers.
Yeah, but once again, it's just like a big question mark. You're about to make whiskey with a rye variety that no one's ever used for that. Barley in Texas is very new. Blackland malting out in Pflugerville and A&M. We're working on heat and drought resistant barley varieties for Texas for years before it finally worked. And we've been buying up as much as we can from that summer forward. I think that was 2016, summer of 2016. And now it's a big chunk, and we buy as much Texas barley as we do Scottish barley. We're trying to make that transition and still figure out what farms, what latitudes and longitudes do best with which variety, malted which way. I think we're on our 7th barley variety that we've planted. So that spreadsheet still is like, there's no conclusive answers yet. Yeah. We know things that do well in the field. Then the next question is, okay, of the things that do well in the field, where do we want them grown? Who do we want them malted by, and how? And what are we going to make with them? So once again, that's a project that I feel like just starting on, really.
And that I mean also speaks to what also fascinates me, not just about Balcones, but about the whiskey business in general, right? 13 years in business sounds like a long time, but in the whiskey business, where you're aging stuff for years, it's almost like retrograded somehow, right? As far as you guys have to wait for things to mature in your barrels and whatnot. So you're always working in a like 3 years forward, 3 years behind type playing field. And
it's a really strange, like it's we're working on things we made years ago on the blending table. So we're putting the finishing touches on whiskey we laid down a long time ago.
Yeah.
And we're laying down whiskey with the concepts of what we've been learning the last few years and things we would like to try, knowing we're not going to get the feedback from that for years. I was talking to somebody the other day, and they couldn't remember what it was, but they saw that there had been a new release, and they were super. Man, I got the new one, and it was super good, delicious, and they couldn't remember what it was, and I found myself going, you're like in my past because I blended that, like 4 months ago.
Yeah.
And I'm working on something else now that comes out in January, and so that's where mentally I'm at, and yet you're just picking something up. It is a little bit of a Back to the Future kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
it's very strange.
Yeah. Well, looking back a little bit at, or looking back at the past, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I guess the story of Balcones, like the first release, was it the Baby Blue?
Baby Blue, yeah. Yep.
And that was, that's a corn whiskey. And I think corn whiskey is a little bit different from what most people might people who haven't dabbled in corn whiskey. It's got different profiles and a little bit different flavor to it. But that, I think that's always been part of the Balcones story, the corn aspect. Was that just a matter of it being a Texas thing and a local product, and that was what was available, or was that always kind of a conscious choice?
No, when we started, the plan was to make single malt. We didn't really have plans for much of anything else. That first year, we were building almost all of our equipment, building platforms for the mash tun to go on, and getting used augers and trying to fit them in the building, and fabricating a lot of our copper equipment. And while we were doing that, well, thanks. We had a mash tun, a used mash tun that we had bought, and it was damaged, and we hadn't had time to fix it yet. And at some point, we realized the whole rest of the distillery was there, so we couldn't do barley, but we could do something else.
Oh, wow.
And it was actually a Tuttletown Hudson up in New York. They don't make this product anymore, but they had a white unaged corn whiskey that they made called Gristmill. And it was kind of a little bit tequila-ish, and it reminded me of Whiskey New Make. And it was just way more flavorful than the usual stuff at the liquor store. You're going to see things like in a mason jar or in like a little clay jug. That's kind of, you're supposed to feel like a hillbilly when you go camping or something. Not a lot of options. And we just thought, the hypothesis was surely you could make something a little more subtle and complex and delicate, much like a Speyside, like a very light, fruity, kind of understated Scotch single malt would be. Could you do that? And of course, the next with corn and not just barley. And of course, the next question is, okay, if you're going to do that, you have to start with some of the tastiest, most interesting base, starch you can. So we started tasting corn, started shopping around for corns. And actually, originally, the first couple of rounds was coming from New Mexico. But we found out the farmers in that co-op were growing on both sides of the border. And so like, well, can we just get stuff that's grown on the Texas side? Yeah. So it's been Texas grown only for, I think, the last 5 or 6. And there was probably mixed in before. We just didn't know it. Right. But yeah, picking the best ingredient you can and then trying to make something that actually tastes like what it's made from, which is a little bit tricky. People who drink whiskey know what wheated bourbons taste like and what wheat contributes to a bourbon, but it doesn't taste like wheat. You have to know what wheat turns into in bourbon. But to make a corn whiskey, and every once in a while someone won't give it the most favorable review, and in their comments they're saying like all these things is exactly what we wanted it to be, which is kind of funny. It just tastes exactly like corn. It's masa and it's tortillas and it's this, that. It's like, yes, that's exactly what we were trying to do.
No, that makes total sense to me as someone who, my whiskey journey, I think goes probably like a lot of people. It's going from like your Jack Daniels and your Jim Beams to, then your Irish whiskeys, like your Jamesons and your Tullamore's and whatnot. And, when I first came across Balcones, it's just really different, right? The corn whiskey, there's like a much more brighter mouthfeel. It's got a brighter flavor palette. I'd describe it as like a loud whiskey almost.
Okay. Yeah.
And it definitely caught me off guard the first time I took it. But what's cool about it is that there's like, it's a flavor journey. It's you're learning your palate. You're learning the palates of different things. And, when you were talking about earlier, the explosion of like even Asian whiskeys and whiskeys from around the world, we're just seeing a wider variety of whiskeys in general.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, world whiskey is kind of a subcategory where all these things get thrown into that don't grow, that aren't being made in traditional whiskey, regions. Which once again, it's going to take us a long time to figure out. Some of what comes from that won't be all great, but there's absolutely combinations both between grain choices microflora, yeast and bacteria that live where you live that end up making their way into the fermentations. Local wood, you know, a lot of the guys in the Pacific Northwest have been playing around with different kind of oak species from the Pacific Northwest. And
their barrels?
Yeah, doing barrels out of Gariana oak. You know, a bunch of friends of ours up there have been messing around with that for years, and just all those kind of things. And the climates, Taiwan and India and us are very hot. They're, you know, the whiskey goes fast, it's dense, it's very easy to get a lot of color and intense wood character. So just things that just weren't really out there before, for people to discover. And yeah, you may not like all of it, especially if your goal is to, if you've already decided what good whiskey is, because you've had a lot of Scotch and a lot of Kentucky bourbon, and you've decided that's what good whiskey is, then maybe a lot of what's going to come from the rest of the world isn't going to interest you too much. But, you know, as not too different from people discovering, you know, this is even 20 years old now, but watching chefs starting to play around with turbinado and demerara sugars, watching average folks, not just ranchers, but regular people start going, holy crap, grass-fed beef is very different, right. You know, or, anyway, those kinds of things. There are going to be new things, and they may not be what you're used to.
Well, I think that's interesting though, because I think part of the journey as a drinker who discovers Balcones is a lot of the discovery process. I mean, we've been talking a lot about corn. You guys do the barley stuff as well, and having that wide variety of options is interesting. It's all, you know, like they're you know, you walk into a liquor store and you see like a flight of Balcones bottles on the walls, and just like a wide variety of directions to go into. And you know, I think what's cool about, you know, some of the products, well, they hit a wide price range for sure. You've got some higher stuff, but then you're looking at stuff like you know, the Baby Blue, the Pot Still, which are kind of flagships, and then now Lineage, which are kind of a way for people to kind of get into what you guys are doing at large. That's how I would look at it.
Yeah. Some of that's a little bit intentional. Nobody on our team. There are brands that are absolutely from conception are set out to be kind of these luxury brands, you know, their lifestyle, you know, and other spirits. Like someone's going to have a new vodka brand, and like it's obvious that the bottle itself costs $50.
Right.
And if they're trying to sell, this is for celebrities or people who want to think they are, right?
Sure.
That has nothing to do with any goal we've got. So over the years, as we've gotten bigger, economies of scale, as things work out the way they do, trying to remove some of those barriers for folks, because craft in general, you know, small producer whiskey, craft whiskey tends to be more expensive. These are small operations. Oh, yeah. They tend to buy nicer barrels. They tend to use more expensive ingredients. There's all these reasons why. But that keeps people away from it. And so every once in a while, we'll pick a product and go, you know what? This is nowhere near the normal kind of return you're expecting on a regular bottle. But I want something that I want to remove excuses. You know, I want to remove barriers that would keep someone from trying. And in the case of Lineage, not just our products, but I think American single malt and barley is more expensive than corn and wheat and rye. So single malts tend to be more expensive. But if you're like, oh, you know, drink a lot of single malt, I drink Irish and Scotch and whatever, and I've been hearing about this American single malt thing, but man, the cheapest thing you see on the shelf is $75. What are the chances you're gonna?
That's intimidating for someone,
you know,
just wanting to taste something, and you see $75.
Right.
But, you know.
So we went intentional with that. Let's come up with a proof that's approachable. Let's come up with a flavor profile that's approachable. And let's price it in an approachable way, so that this conversation that now for us is 13 years long between where we are and the kind of whiskey that can be and has been made in the U.S. and also the traditional, you know, UK single malts that inspired us and started us on our journey. How do we kind of bridge those communities and those traditions and add to that conversation and figure out a way to kind of fuse those things together. So with Lineage, the price and all that was super intentional. I want people to try this category, not just ours. I think it is vibrant. It's exciting. It's one of the coolest things that's happening in the world of whiskey right now. And if price is a problem, or if proof's a problem, or if it's too robust, or it's not robust enough, or it's too similar to Scotch, or it's not similar to Scotch enough, we kind of try to ride a middle road, but at the same time make something that, I mean, some of our blenders, it's one of our favorite things they make. We definitely didn't cut any corners or make something that's kind of watered down and neutered, you know. We were in the mood. We drink cask strength whiskey right out of the barrel all the time. So the idea of having a lower proof, more approachable single malt in the lineup, we were actually very excited that's the kind of stuff we want to drink when we're not working.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. And I think that's so. I'm gonna open this up right now and pour myself a little bit. But so
please do.
What's interesting about Lineage, and I think it's right there in the name, like you're paying homage to where, you as distillers have come from, right? Because what we're talking about with Lineage is we're talking about a spirit that has elements of Texas, but also elements of kind of the fatherland of whiskey as well.
Yeah.
You tell me, was that? I mean, certainly that must have been the goal, right? You weren't trying to hit both points there.
Yeah, absolutely. So once the Texas barley thing was viable and we were laying it down and we were starting to be a couple of years into that process and seeing how that whiskey was going and how the barrels were developing, at the same time, so we kind of started knowing. Cheers. Yeah, I'm not set up. I've got water.
Bad luck to cheers with water, though. I hear.
Yeah. You just I think you have to just pour it out, throw it over your shoulder, something like that. We knew we wanted to work on this profile, and while we were in the middle of blending it, we were struggling with it a little bit. And I just had the idea, we should pull some of that Texas stuff and see where it's at. And somehow the combination of the two was better than anything we were working on its own. So what we ended up with is we've got the Texas barley that we're growing now, and Scottish barley that we've used historically from the beginning. And then really the maturation tradition, the barrel tradition of the U.S. is all virgin oak, bourbon and rye traditionally. This is all very oak forward. They go into new casks that have never had whiskey in them before. Scotch is the opposite. These are usually ex-bourbon casks. Yeah. So we really took all of that, the grain from both places and both different traditions' approach to barreling and maturation, and combined those four. I guess there's four quadrants there: Texas barley, Scottish barley, American maturation traditions, and kind of old world maturation traditions. And it's fruity in ways that our others aren't, and the wood's soft in ways that most of our products are one way or the other. We usually do refill or virgin. We usually don't mix the two a lot, and trying to figure out how those two play together. And the spice, the fruit character from the two different barleys is also very different and complementary, and kind of makes just a handful more layers and some things that can kind of happen as from the beginning to the end on the palate. So
just drinking it right now, you're saying fruitiness. There's an absolute fruitiness to it. Maybe like a medium body to it. What should a drinker be looking for when sipping on?
We think a lot about texture. There is some spice, but it's not like black pepper and aggressive stuff, but it's a lot more like baking, maybe nutmeg and things like that, maybe hints of cinnamon on the finish. The mid palate's a little bit honeyish, it's not sticky sweet, but there's a texture to it. There's a viscosity to it. Yeah. There are layers of fruit. I mean, there's apricots and peaches, there's apples and pears. There's even a little bit of a citrus zest on the nose a little bit. Sometimes I can even get a little bit of hint of kind of wine-like grape skin notes later on.
These are elements that are coming from the barrel, right?
Some of that's coming from the barrels. A lot of the fruit notes are going to end up coming from the fermentation itself. Yeah, the final pH, kind of the parameters, how much acid you develop during your fermentation can have a lot to do with fruit perception and aromas. Fruit aromas and floral aromas can come from that. Some of the sweetness and spice is more of a barrel thing, and then the texture of both too. You can get a really oily, viscous spirit right off the stills using pot stills like we do, and then you also get some wood sugar contributions that obviously make the body a little bit rounder as well.
Yeah, and there's like there's a slight smokiness to it as well, but not an overwhelmingness. It's got a nice rounded flavor to it. I would say.
Yeah, thanks.
Is that the blending aspect of the two different?
Yeah, just trying to find. We don't always lean into balance. Every once we let ourselves get a little out of whack if it's something that we think is beautiful and compelling. This was a more of an exercise in that. I don't really want it to be dominated by any of those things. Hopefully something you can come back to, and things just kind of in succession, you find out more things about it and you kind of notice some subtle things that were there. And it's not really about one thing. Like we definitely make whiskeys that are about smoke or whiskeys that are all about fruit. And there's some fruit, there's some nuttiness, there's some sweetness, there's some spice, there's some oak. So, something that can kind of unfold, but also I just like a good Pilsner, for example, not everything needs to be the star of the show. If I'm sitting down with a 15% barrel aged, vanilla imperial stout or something, when I'm doing that, or a sherry, I'm going to be paying attention to that thing. It's kind of hard to do that like on the side without giving it some of your attention. But a good Pilsner should be made in a way that if you want to pay attention to it, you can. But it can totally just be an accompaniment to whatever it is that you're in the middle of doing. And a lot of our stuff's over the top. A lot of our stuff, the proof is really high and the flavors are really punchy and massive. And so it's a little bit of an intentionality. This is a whiskey that intentionally can kind of come alongside other things, and not screaming for attention, not begging for you to make it the center of what's happening, but they can join you in other happenings, you know?
Well, and it's taken a while for it to get to that point, right? So this bottle right here that I'm looking at, like, how long was this age? Like, what?
All the whiskey.
How long has this bottle been in the works?
Yeah, so this is one of our older age-stated products too. So we went with 3-year-olds on purpose. It's one of the nice things.
Dog's freaking out. So I'm going to take it real
no problem.
Sorry,
having been at this for a while, we're finally getting to having enough stock to let things go a little bit. So this is the first thing we've ever released that was 3 years right from the first bottling, 3 years plus. Yeah, as we started working on it, we knew, like, okay, we can make this 3 years plus, and the age may creep up over the years. We'll see. But there's probably as much as, like, there's maybe some 5-year-old stuff. We don't have a whole lot that's older than that anywhere in the warehouse, but it's like a 3 to 5, the majority being kind of somewhere in between. Yeah.
Was it when you were, when that 3-year process started, was it always known like this was going to be
a
lineage thing, or like how do you get to this point?
We're always we're doing better at it these days than we used to, but usually it's if there's a new product or a new process available that we get excited about using, we usually just go ahead and lay it down, and then we figure it out later. So no, this was already the Texas barley, the Texas single malts were already on the table. We already make plenty of things with all the Scottish barley. And we just had a month where all of our malt was out. We were pretty much just checking on experiments and seeing how things were going. Things were laid down a long time ago. And we were working on a regular single malt blend at the time, but we had the Texas barley out. Yeah, and it just made sense to like combine them and the synergy we kind of got out of that we were really excited, like right from the get-go. I was like, oh, this is a cool direction. Then it's like, I have to go to the next like meeting with managers and owners and be like, hey, we're going to release a new single malt. And they were like, good. We were going to ask if you guys would make a lower proof single malt for us. Like, perfect. We're already working on it.
Was approachability a big part of the goal there? With that?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. For someone who's like, oh, I'm super into whiskey. I buy, I collect, I go to distilleries, I go to conferences, I go to whiskey tastings. I'm in a whiskey club. For someone like that, 120 proof isn't off-putting. And in fact, a lot of people that are super into whiskey prefer really high proofs. And I forget sometimes that for some regular folks, most of what you drink might be 40 or 43%. So even 46, which is kind of as low as we go, might even seem a little hefty compared to something that's at 40%. But for us, it's pretty low. So definitely try to make it push.
It still packs a bit of a punch. I'll give it.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. It's just funny when you want to know you're drinking whiskey,
Yeah.
I do. When I drink whiskey, I want to know that I'm drinking whiskey.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Jared, this has been a great little kind of breakdown of what you guys got going on with Lineage. I really appreciate you taking the time to walk through it with me today. And, I really enjoyed getting a chance to see it up front myself, the distillery last week, and see it from Thomas and Gabe, and just learning what you guys got going on down there. And it's really exciting. And I'm excited to see more of what you guys have in store next, because I know there's, like you said, you guys are always kind of tinkering and experimenting.
Yeah, there's always more than we can. Almost every year something gets pushed to the next year because it's just like we have too many things to try and get done. But
yeah, that's the thing. It's almost like as whiskey ages and comes into form, so too does Balcones, I suppose.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, hey, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today, Jared.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Good to see you, Pete.
Yeah, good to see you. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Bye.